Now that we understand about biodiversity and the importance biodiversity plays in our everyday lives, it's important to kind of understand where organisms fit within our ecosystems. Not just on the environmental aspect, but then also for humans, it's really important to understand the roles that organisms play because the interactions between those organisms can directly affect humans and can directly affect biodiversity. Now, hopefully a lot of this information will be a review, so if you're thinking, duh, I already know this, it's okay. Like, the very first unit's kind of a review of a lot of things, but I just want to make sure that we all have the same basic information before we start building on it for the rest of the semester. So one of the roles, and probably the most important ecosystem role, is that of a producer. So a producer is an organism that gets energy from the sun, and most of these organisms are green. And you probably already know this. So things like trees that you see here, grasses, more or less plants. All plants are producers. There are some other organisms that are also producers. There are some species of protists and some species of bacteria. You don't really need to know that, but just know it's not just plants. There are other organisms out there that can also get energy from the sun. The reason most of these organisms are green is because they have a special chemical called chlorophyll. You don't need to know that name, just I mention it in case you have heard of it before. Chlorophyll is a pigment that is actually capturing that solar energy, and that pigment is a green pigment. Now this thing that just popped up, this picture that popped up, you may have seen before, more than likely you've seen before on a pond, maybe on a golf course, especially on a golf course, maybe slow-moving rivers. Some people just call it pond scum, but what this is algae. And algae is technically not a plant, but for the purpose of this course, because it doesn't really matter for the material we're going to talk about, we'll call it a plant. But algae is an aquatic plant. So it's green, kind of like our land plants that we imagine. They also get energy from the sun. And the reason I make a special note about them is, one, we'll talk about algae in actually a couple of our other units. But also, keep in mind, our Earth is majority water. And so although when we think of plants and we think of producers, we think of things on land, algae plays an incredibly important ecosystem role in our oceans and in our freshwater ecosystems. So just don't forget about them, because although maybe you see them in huge mats like this, most of them are microscopic. You could go into a stream and take out a scoop of water and you're like, oh, it's clear water. But more than likely there's microscopic algae in it. So they are very, very important to their ecosystems. And I'll touch upon that more in just a moment. Now I said that plants get their energy from the sun. And the way they do that is through the process of photosynthesis. And the word photosynthesis kind of gives you a hint as to what's happening. So photo refers to light, and synthesis means to put things together. And that's what photosynthesis pretty much is. It's taking a couple of ingredients, and with the energy that comes from light, rearranging those ingredients into something more useful. So I have a picture of a leaf here, and the reason for that is that photosynthesis, although it can happen anywhere on a plant or any green part of a plant, a majority of photosynthesis is happening on the leaves. You can almost think of leaves as solar panels. That is their job, to create this energy. So you're probably familiar with photosynthesis. You may have heard about it before, and you could probably actually already tell me what photosynthesis makes, thinking about just what you know about plants. So for example, plants need air, but very specifically, they need CO2 or carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's actually pretty cool. Leaves have these little mouths that literally open and close. And this is going to allow air in and air out. And we'll talk about air out in just a moment. So our leaves very specifically need carbon dioxide. They're pulling that in from our atmosphere. As we've already mentioned, and because you know something about plants, we know that plants need sunlight. They need some sort of light energy. Now the reason I say light energy is some plants can photosynthesize using just lamps. For the purpose of this class, we're just going to say sun, but don't be like, well, I have this one plant and it's never in the sun. How is it still here? Some plants can use things that aren't the sun, but no matter what, they do need light. You can't grow a plant in total darkness because that will kill it. It needs to have that energy that's harnessed in light waves. And then finally, if you don't water your plants will die as well. And so water, although I have it pointing to the leaf because that's where photosynthesis happens, water is absorbed by the roots. And this water, you see it here, H2O. So you've just be familiar with both H2O and water. Same with CO2 and carbon dioxide. I will tell you right now, I'm not going to say, what does CO2 stand for? I'm not going to ask you that. But be able to recognize that CO2 is carbon dioxide, that H2O is water. So now our plant leaf has all these ingredients. It's got sunlight hitting it, it's absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it's soaked in water from the roots, and we have everything that we need. And so what the plant does with that is using that light energy, it's able to split these molecules and rearrange these molecules. So one of the things that it makes is sugars. The classic sugar that we learn about is glucose, which is C6H12O6. Again, I am not going to say what's the molecular formula of sugar and expect you to memorize this, but be able to recognize C6H12O6 is glucose. Also, same thing, you can use glucose, you can say sugar, either one's fine. Anyway, this isn't sugar that's just released out of the plant. It's not like leaves are dripping in sugar. These sugars are actually get incorporated into the plant and help that plant to grow. This is why plants get more leaves. This is why they develop flowers. This is why they grow taller. This is why their roots grow deeper. So photosynthesis is essentially the way plants grow. Now the bigger a plant is, that means it's technically more food for other organisms, and we'll talk about that more soon. And then finally, photosynthesis does make a waste product that we as humans and other animals greatly benefit from, and that's oxygen. Oxygen is O2. And so oxygen actually gets released by those same little mouths that we're taking in carbon dioxide. And in this process, plants make oxygen, and they don't really need that much oxygen, so they release that oxygen back into the atmosphere. Incredibly important for us because we as humans, we need that oxygen. Now, as I mentioned on a previous slide, don't forget about algae. Remember, algae are our plants in the water. If we look at all the oxygen that exists on Earth, about half of that oxygen is produced by algae. And so it's easy to think, oh, we've got these trees and these grasses and the tropics. Yeah, they do a lot of photosynthesis, but they're only doing about half. The organisms, although we may not see them in the ocean because they're microscopic, they are serving a very, very, very important function. They're creating about half of the sugars, half of the oxygen in the world. So I just put this in here just because I don't want you guys forgetting about our aquatic ecosystems, because they play a very important role in some of the things that humans need. Now, just to summarize all of this, the thing that just popped up at the bottom of this slide is just an overview of this equation. So we have carbon dioxide plus water plus light energy, whether that's sunlight or a lamp. And in the leaves, that creates glucose and it creates oxygen. Now, if any of you took a high school chemistry class or even college chemistry class, you're probably looking at this and you're probably a little angry because you're saying this isn't balanced. And you're right. It's not balanced, but don't worry about that. I don't care about that. I just have this as an overview. On the test, I could say, what's the formula for photosynthesis? You could tell me all of these molecular structures. You could also write out carbon dioxide and water and sun equals sugar and oxygen. It doesn't matter to me. Biggest thing is I just want you to be able to recognize both forms, both the molecular formula as well as what's the actual word describing that structure. So lots of organisms, all of our producers are doing this photosynthesis. They're creating these sugars. But we as humans aren't producers. Producers are important, but we're not. And most of the things that you can probably think of aren't producers either. Most of us are consumers, at least of all the organisms you might be brainstorming about. And so what consumers do is they just eat other organisms. This slide is going to be kind of really basic, but just, again, to get us all on the same page. We can classify our consumers based on what they typically eat. So we have herbivores. They're typically eating producers. So they're eating grasses, trees, algae, other types of producers. We have carnivores, and so mostly they're eating meat, and so they're essentially eating other consumers. And then we also have omnivores, which are eating both. And so for the most part, humans are omnivores. We evolved, and our teeth structure is that for omnivores. Obviously, people have their own personal preferences. You got the vegetarians and the vegans, they'd be herbivores. You've got the Ron Swansons in the world, those would be our carnivores. But at least, looking at an evolutionary standpoint, humans are omnivores. Now, I did say, maybe you caught it, maybe you didn't, is that herbivores mostly eat plants and carnivores mostly eat meat. I do want to make it clear that a turtle doesn't care if it sometimes slips up and eats an insect. It's not like, oh, I'm an herbivore, I can only eat herbs. Or wolves, they're not like, oh man, I think I got some grass while I was eating this. It's more of, this is what they look for sustenance, but that doesn't necessarily mean like it is 100% exclusively the only thing they eat. The other thing too, related to this, is that if an animal is starving, same with humans, same with pretty much any animal in the animal world, if an animal is starving and they're an herbivore, but they see a dead carcass, or they see an anthill, or if there's a wolf and they see a whole bunch of berries, if they're starving, they're going to eat whatever they can in order to not starve. That's just more of an aside. I'm not testing you on that. You should know in general what herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores are, but I wanted to just share that because I don't want you going out into the world thinking wolves 100% eat meat all the time. They would never eat anything else. Hell no, if you're starving, you're going to eat something else. Our last type of ecosystem role are decomposers. And decomposers are a type of consumer, but we don't really, they're a type of consumer in the fact that they're not photosynthesizing, they're not taking energy from the sun, they're still eating, they're still consuming something. It's just, what they eat are dead things. So you wouldn't really classify them as an herbivore or a carnivore. They might be eating dead apples, so bacteria might be decomposing dead apples. A vulture might be eating a dead deer carcass. Fungi could really be on anything. So we don't really classify them as an herbivore because they decompose plants. We just say they're a decomposer because they're not really hunting that plant, they're not really hunting that deer. They're just taking advantage of what has already been left behind from something else, whether it's from another predator, whether it's from natural causes, that apple fell from the tree and nothing ate it. So just know that decomposers exist as well. They eat and they break down dead organisms. They are a consumer, they're just not considered herbivores, omnivores, etc.